Hey everyone, welcome to the recording from Warsaw MuleSoft Meetup held on April 16, 2025. The video was slightly edited to improve the visibility of the slides and the overall viewing experience. You're about to watch a great session on MuleSoft RTF and Flex Gateway on AKS, packed with insights, setup guidelines, administration tips, and more. So, without further ado, let's hand it over to our speaker. Enjoy!
Hello. Okay, so my name is Paulina Uhman. I will be your presenter today. From my integration experience, currently hosting a position of senior integration architect at PwC, but I like to think about myself rather as a integration specialist, because my role is not only about designing and architecture, but also I'm a developer, I'm a platform administrator, sometimes supporting DevOps roles, and all around MuleSoft technology. In total, I have over 9 years of experience in IT, with MuleSoft solely working from 2022. Some may think that is not a lot, but I think that this journey was quite intense. And during that time, I learned a lot, also presenting you my fancy badges from my certificates. So I have 4 certificates of MuleSoft, 2 of Salesforce, 1 from AWS. From other technologies, I have some experience with TIBCO. That was my starting point in integration. I have also some experience with Salesforce and some experience and knowledge with AWS. Personally, I love to travel. I'm a football fan, I'm an athlete, and tennis player. I chose tennis, but basically most of the activities I like, from Zumba, running, capoeira, all that stuff. So that would probably be it about myself.
Okay, a little bit about myself. My name is Patryk Bandurski. I'm leading Warsaw MuleSoft Meetup group. I recently was introduced into the Hall of Fame of MuleSoft ambassadors, something like Salesforce MVP staff. And from my personal experience, I've just been working with MuleSoft for about 12 years right now, with multiple variety of products that they've got there. And I like to really enjoy sharing the experience I've gained over these years. And you can find some of the articles on my personal blog, Ambassador Patryk, where you can actually write down updating all the articles, so you can as well experience the fresh and up-to-date content. It's really hard to refresh the content to make it really up-to-date. I believe we can move to the next section. I just wanted to summarize from the last meetup. There was Polish drinking, bigger events, Salesforce related, and of course MuleSoft was there. And we got quite good representations. And as you can see on the screen, I've just posted a couple of pictures with all those people. There was those MuleSoft related topics which were excellent, and I attended all of them. I think, yeah, we got quite a lot of fun. So you can hear all the speakers that there were on that presentation. This was the day before. And I encourage you to sign up for such events. It's not only as a participant, but share knowledge as well. Spread a little bit of it. That's it. Let's move to what you came here for. Of course, this event wouldn't be possible without our 2 partners that we've got, MuleSoft allowing us to actually create and this group has vouchers. Yes, I will have vouchers for Salesforce certificates on Salesforce, which means also MuleSoft. You can pick one. So the quiz winners will receive some. And of course, PwC Poland, that's without its support, we won't be able to hold this event in such long places. For our last 5 years, having a good time afterwards with the networking. And of course, something is happening behind me that I can't relate. And we've got as well my 2 colleagues sitting over here that whenever you would like to discuss and verify your LinkedIn profile, if it's positioned well, if it requires some amendments, feel free to reach to them. They are very experienced, know their stuff. They're from IHR, so they know how to improve your profile to be cool. Yeah, that's definitely a
Okie dokie, let's start. Today we'll be talking about Runtime Fabric, MuleSoft Runtime Fabric, and MuleSoft or Endpoint Flex Gateway on Azure Kubernetes Service. So my first question, both to the audience in person and online, is how many of you have any experience with any of those products? If you can raise your hands or you can type on the chat. Okay, that's quite a lot. That's actually, I anticipated a little bit less. This is because Runtime Fabric is not very popular deployment target because of Cloud Hub, of course, which is the obvious choice for deployment because ready-to-use platform. With RTF and Flex Gateway, it's a little bit different because it's not hosted and not fully supported by Mule. It's good that you have some experience, so you will basically know the concepts and hopefully that you will still get something from the session, that you will not go bored the entire time. So for those who doesn't know what it is and have no experience with that, Runtime Fabric is, as I mentioned, deployment target for Mule applications. So most of you probably is familiar with Cloud Hub as your base deployment target. RTF is the next option that you can deploy your MuleSoft application on your customer hosted infrastructure. So either it's a cloud platforms, on-prem data centers, it supports deployment application outside the endpoint platform or Cloud Hub. It is container service, so it uses the concept of containers. It also uses the underlying infrastructure as a hosting infrastructure. MuleSoft will not be provided this part. And it works with control plane of endpoint platform, which means that you can manage and you can deal with Runtime Fabric the same or similar way that you are dealing with application deployed on the Cloud Hub. As for the Flex Gateway, is the, as they MuleSoft say, it's a lightweight gateway that you can also manage and secure your APIs anywhere. And in this case, you don't have to use your MuleSoft APIs. Basically, any API that is exposed via HTTP or HTTPS can be secured with Flex Gateway. And with this product, we have two options currently. So we can have self-managed Flex Gateway, which is deployed on the customer infrastructure, and something quite recent, which is managed Flex Gateway. This is the option which you can deploy within endpoint platform and the Cloud Hub infrastructure. So it's fully managed by MuleSoft. But we will focus today on the self-managed, and the self-managed also comes with two modes. One of them is connected mode, which we will be discovering today, and the other one is the local mode. Okie dokie. The concept of shared responsibility, because as I mentioned, we will be deploying both of those products not on MuleSoft supported infrastructure and the delivered infrastructure. So there are certain components that need to be delivered either by you if you are the customer or the customer you are working with, which will be either the cloud administrator or Kubernetes administrators. Basically, there are certain pieces of the puzzle that need to be provided and which are not supported by MuleSoft. And it's not anything super exciting. This is something that I felt I need to share with you for those who don't know that yet, because MuleSoft emphasizes it all the time, that you need to have certain amount of knowledge, you need to provide this and this, because they will not be supporting it for you. So if we look at the diagram on the screen right now, you can see that the components that are provided by MuleSoft for RTF are the endpoint platform control plane, of course, the runtime fabric agents and components. So everything that is deployed, in our case, on the Kubernetes cluster, that will help you manage and support the deployment of the application. Mule Runtime, which comes with the Docker images for all the runtimes, all the sidecars, containers, and everything. So that is supported. So what is not supported? It's underlying hosting infrastructure, which is Kubernetes cluster. It can be either AWS, so Elastic Kubernetes Service, Azure Kubernetes, Google, Red Hat OpenShift implementation on cloud. Additionally, load balancers, so anything additional to what MuleSoft provides. If you need additional load balancing, you need to provide that. Ingress for the Kubernetes is also not provided by MuleSoft. Registry, optionally, if you want to use local registry, you also need to provide that. Monitoring, metrics, logging, proxies, and the entire networking, because MuleSoft will not be able to ensure any networking capabilities. I think we pretty much covered the shared responsibility for RTF. For Flex Gateway is quite similar. So what MuleSoft provides and is responsible for is obviously Flex Gateway installation, all the files necessary. So that contains also base Helm chart for the installation, Docker images with the registry if you want to use the public one. And your or your customer's responsibility is maintaining connectivity to endpoint control plane, because you need to register your Flex Gateway. And additionally, working on Kubernetes, you need to deliver all the things, all the similar things that for the RTF, which is an external load balancing. If you want to adjust Helm charts or ingress resources to your needs, then you need to also update that, log forwarding, monitoring, networking as well. Log forwarding into some extent, I will also tell you that later. So as we discussed shared responsibility model, from my personal perspective, I can also tell you about shared knowledge model, I would say. So in theory, we are MuleSoft specialists, so we have MuleSoft knowledge, and they or people who are hosting our infrastructure are either Kubernetes specialists or cloud administrators, DevOps, networks, security, whatever. So combined, we should have it all. But the truth is that we need to share some common knowledge. So you as a MuleSoft specialist, you need to have a knowledge about Kubernetes, at least base concepts. You don't need to be specialist, but you need to understand what components are underneath your installation. And also on the other side, they need to understand MuleSoft approach to deliver product, to deliver APIs, to the deployment also strategy, etc. So they also need to understand that there are pieces that are on their Kubernetes infrastructure, but there are also pieces on an endpoint platform which will be connecting to them, and there is a reason behind that. So as we spoke about Kubernetes a lot, my next question to the audience here and online will be, how many of you have experience with Kubernetes and understand the base concepts? So similar amount, I would say that whoever worked with RTF needs to also have some knowledge about Kubernetes. I decided not to introduce Kubernetes concepts on this session because it will probably take too much time. But for those who don't understand things like services, pods, cluster in general, stuff like that, and you feel lost at some point, just let us know. I will try to explain things on the fly. Hopefully they are self-explanatory concepts, but if you feel like you're lost or you want me to explain something more, just let us know. And also, I imagine this session that will be interactive, so there will be no demo at the end. I will be showing you things after something I've explained. If you want me to show you something more, click here, click there. Also, let me know. I will try to show you around. Okay, so where to start? Because we need to start somewhere. We need to install our products. So the first step probably would be to an endpoint platform, because for both Flex Gateway and RTF, you have the complete list of the commands that you need to execute, or the reference to your documentation pages, how to install both products. So when you go to an endpoint platform and you want to create any of those products, you will choose the deployment target or deployment host, which for Flex Gateway is either Linux service, Docker container, Kubernetes, or OpenShift, and for Runtime Fabric are different distribution of Kubernetes, basically, so your cloud services like AKS, EKS, etc. And RTF supports the installation with two options, which is using Helm and Helm chart provided, or using RTF command line tool. And the command line tool will basically go with the default options. So if you want to customize anything, you need to go with Helm charts. The next thing that when I would be looking for some additional help will be official documentation. It's also a little bit more comprehensive probably than just those commands that you need to run to install the components. So if you feel like you are lost or you don't understand the step, then always the official documentation will help. And the final thing that I discovered quite recently, this is also a little bit embarrassing, but if you also don't know about things like tutorials and how-tos on developer.mulesoft.com, then I strongly recommend. I will go to this page right now. So here you have several tutorials on how to install Runtime Fabric and Flex Gateway on several hosting infrastructures. So you can find Azure Kubernetes Service, but you can see also that there are Google Kubernetes Engine, OpenShift, and other things. And there is also a little bit more information on those tutorials if you want to do a little bit more than just plain installation. So for example, in this case, you also have some instructions on how to create the cluster. So if you're not familiar with that, you can start there. There are some comments how to verify things. And what is also quite interesting is also creating of custom ingress controller. Because in our case that I will be presenting, Flex Gateway will be serving as a gateway and distributing the traffic to the Kubernetes services. But if you want to try out something else, then there is an option to install Nginx controller. And also there is an ingress resource that is quite nice to understand how the traffic is routed by ingress controller, because Flex Gateway will not be working as one in the scenario that I'm trying to show you. So for the Flex Gateway, you also have some tutorials here, so I recommend to go through them if you want to get familiar with those tools. They're also quite comprehensive, and also they have some additional stuff that are not there in the instructions. So for example, for Runtime Fabric, you need to apply the MuleSoft license at some point, and here they will tell you basically where you can find it. For those who don't have it, you can basically download it from the support page. Since we will not be going through step-by-step tutorials today, because you can do that yourself, and I think that they're pretty self-explanatory, what I want to show you is the already installed and reconfigured and deployed things to show you what it looks like if you don't have option to play with RTF. As I mentioned, there are some concepts of Kubernetes that you need to know, and these are the services, the namespaces that are around Kubernetes, and what is created while the installation is completed and the applications are deployed as following. So for Flex Gateway, when we install Flex Gateway on Kubernetes as a Kubernetes deployment, it will create one namespace. By default, it's called Gateway, but you can customize that easily. There exposes one service, Kubernetes service, which is called Ingress, but this is of type load balancer. And this is pretty much it about Flex Gateway, because all the rest you will be customizing and managing from any point platform. And for RTF, there are two main pieces, let's say. So there is agent namespace, which is by default RTF, and I suggest to keep it by default. This is because there are a lot of references to this namespace, so you need to be very careful when you create other things to not to break it. But since it's quite self-explanatory also, and it's not like random, I don't know, string of characters, then it makes sense to keep it like that. And within this agent namespace, there are several services. All of them are of type cluster IP. I will show you that also in a second. I will not go into details of what those services do separately, but altogether they provide us the option to manage our application on RTF, on the cluster, to secure them also with the API manager, to monitor them in some extent, to install the runtimes, to manage them, and so on. So there are four main services, which is Agent Matrix, Mule Cluster IP Service, and Resource Cache. These are installed by default. But if you want to use persistent object store in Runtime Fabric, then you need to enable also persistent gateway. But this is not something that you can just install on the cluster. That need to be connected to the Postgres database. So if you want to use persistent object store, you need to provide Postgres database first, then you can configure the persistent gateway resource on your Runtime Fabric agent. And the next namespace, which is probably the one that you will be dealing with the most, is the namespace when you deploy your application. So when you deploy the application from the Runtime Manager, it will create the namespace. By default, it will create it with environment ID, which is the GUID, which says pretty much nothing. But you can also easily change that, and I will show you that in a second. On my infrastructure that I configured already is customized. And on each of the deployment creates within this namespace of the environment ID one service which exposes the application that we have on our app container, and the service is with the name of the application. So I just quickly show you what you need to do to create the namespace for application deployment. It's quite straightforward, but you need to remember that before you do that, you cannot have the default one because the deployment will fail. So you need to create the namespace with the namespace you want. And you need to add some labels to this namespace so the agent will understand that this is the deployment target for your environment, for your applications. So you need to add agent namespace. So this is something that refers to the namespace I just mentioned, probably not to change that. And you need to also add the environment ID and the org ID, and that's it. And the Runtime Fabric will understand that this is the namespace where you want to have your application. Let me see, okay. So this is our, let's say, solution that I want to show you today. So we have a Kubernetes cluster that is on Azure cloud platform, but don't get very attached to this Azure platform because many of the concepts that we will be covering today are transferable to any Kubernetes distribution, basically. So the same thing you can achieve on any other Kubernetes. So what we have here is the Flex Gateway as an ingress or as a gateway. It has one API created on it to enable traffic to the internal services. Then we have a service exposed by Mule application, and we have Mule application deployed on the cluster as well with some API created as a base endpoint. And I will be reaching that infrastructure from the public internet. So this is one approach to this architecture. Here I added a link to some other approaches that MuleSoft provides, how to use Flex Gateway and how to place Flex Gateway, especially because RTF is maybe more obvious, but Flex Gateway can serve many things. It can be only internal, it can expose internally external APIs or externally your internal APIs, and you can see in this link how it's done. Let's get to the Microsoft Azure portal, and I would like to show you things that I just mentioned. So what we can see now are the namespaces. Some of them are default Kubernetes namespaces, some are my old ones, but I want to show you, first of all, RTF namespace. There is a Gateway Meetup namespace. So these three I will be using for today's session, but you can see also some old ones. So this is the default one that is created when your application is deployed. It's just a leftover. This is the default one when you install your Flex Gateway with the default options. So I will show you around from the Azure portal perspective, but then we will try to do the same with the command line interface, which is I will be using the commands that are common for Kubernetes, not proprietary to Azure portal. So as I mentioned, we have this RTF namespace. We have some workloads here. There's an agent, there is MuleSoft cluster IP service and the resource cache. If we go to the agent, we can see that we have one pod there, and this pod contains init container, which is the one that is on the startup, and we have app and RTFD containers. It's not very interesting. I just wanted to show you around the platform. So for the cluster IP, we have also one pod and we have one container here, which exposes cluster IP service, and the resource cache, which enables us to deploy application. This is where the application will look for some dependencies on the installation. We have two containers here. So this is pretty much it. But if we want to see what is under the hood from the console, we can use kubectl commands. We can get namespaces first. So you will see the namespaces that I have just shown you. Then we can see the services that are within the namespace. We need to specify the namespace, which will be our RTF. You can see that we have 4 services here, which I just showed you. We can also get pods if you are very interested in the pods that are there, which are the workloads that are hosting our applications. You can also check their availability or liveliness here, that they are running and their status is okay and everything. So if you go now to the gateway meetup, so this is our gateway namespace. You see the workloads ingress, and there is one service of this as well. So we have one pod here, and we have only one container that is hosting our entire Flex Gateway installation, which is quite interesting, by the way. So we can also see similar thing here. So if we go to the services of our gateway meetup, so we can see that we have this service ingress of type load balancer. We can also check the external IP. And we can also see what is under the MuleSoft Meetup Dev, which is our custom namespace for application deployment. So if we see the services here that are exposed, so we can see that we have Mule Meetup app, which is the name of the application that I deployed from Runtime Manager. I will show you that also later on. It's of type cluster IP, and it exposes several ports. You can check all that here. So this is pretty much it in terms of the components on the Azure portal. Are there any questions maybe here before I will move on?
There is one.
Chat. Okay.
Let me quote. Do I understand correctly that RTF is in this demo is not for the Flex itself, but to show how Flex is deployed in front of the RTF?
Actually both, because we have a service also deployed on RTF. It's dummy service, dummy application that will basically returning some message. So let's get back to the connectivity flow. So we have MuleSoft application deployed on the Kubernetes cluster, and this is RTF application. So I'm showing you the capabilities of being able to deploy Mule application easily on the customer hosted infrastructure. And Flex Gateway is here to show you some concepts and how to call the service that is exposed by Mule application. So I would say that they are both together to show you together the concepts of both products. Hope that answered the question. I will not be using RTF APIs to manage Flex Gateway because these are 2 separate products. Maybe I will read the question for people in the room. So the question is, you will not be using RTF APIs and management to control Flex Gateway. Yeah, I think that answered the question. So the idea is that Runtime Fabric is the deployment target for our MuleSoft applications and the APIs in terms of MuleSoft applications. And Flex Gateway is a gateway that will be also have capabilities to secure our APIs, but it doesn't have to be MuleSoft applications. So these are 2 separate products, but I combined them together to show you how you can call the service of MuleSoft API, but also how to create and manage Flex Gateway from any point platform. Are there any other questions? No, okay. As I mentioned, we will be creating APIs from API Manager, and we will be deploying applications from Runtime Manager, and we will also be creating application and API Manager that we will then deploy, if I may say that, on our MuleSoft applications, the same way that we are doing that for Cloud Hub with auto discovery mode. So it will be tied to the application, and I will show you that in a minute. But before we can create all those pieces, I want to share some information or some tips with you. So when we have Flex Gateway deployed as a deployment on Kubernetes service, it is the load balancer type of the service that exposes two ports, 80 for HTTP calls and for 3 for HTTPS. So this is the port that we will be calling when trying to reach our Flex Gateway endpoint. You can also set up the base path for your API. I will also show you that in a minute. So you don't have to expose exactly the same path as it is for your application. You can add something to it to expose the application, the API, the way you want. And so in our case, we will be forwarding our traffic to the service endpoint of the application that is deployed on the cluster. So we will be using the service host name. And RTF applications, when deployed on RTF, are reachable from within the cluster when you combine the application name dot the namespace. The application name is the name that we give when we deploy application from Runtime Manager. So it's not what you have in artifact name or whatever in POM, but the one that is put into Runtime Manager when we deploy application. And the namespace here after the dot is optional. So for example, if you have application deployed, two applications deployed within the same namespace. So for example, we have dev environment and we have two applications there, then can reach each of them via service exposed just with the name but because we have a Flex Gateway which is deployed in different namespace, we will be adding dot and the namespace of the application deployment namespace. And for both HTTP and HTTPS, we can use 8081 for the RTF applications. So the Cloud API deployed on Flex Gateway and executed on Flex Gateway. But as we know, we have also option to deploy or to create API from API Manager and choose the deployment target of Mule Gateway, which will be MuleSoft application. And we have two options. Probably most of you those two options. One is the proxy, which will spin up new MuleSoft application and basically create a lightweight application that will solely execute the policies that we assigned to the proxy, and Mule Gateway with auto discovery. This is something that most of you probably know very well from Cloud Hub. So this is the setup when we create the API and API Manager. From then we can retrieve API ID and assign this API ID within the MuleSoft application using auto discovery configuration. So these are three options in this solution, how we can create APIs and manage APIs. And we all do that from API Manager. And in terms of MuleSoft application itself, as I mentioned, we will be using 8081 for both HTTP and HTTPS. Then when deploy application on RTF, we need to remember about environment credentials. If you want to use auto discovery, you need to provide environment credentials to the API, to the endpoint platform. And during the deployment of RTF, also you can choose the number of replicas, so the size of the replica as well. So you can, from Runtime Manager, you can scale your RTF applications the same way or in similar way that you scale them on your Cloud Hub deployment. And for zero downtime deployment, we can also have two options. So it's either rolling update, which will first create or spin up new pods or new replicas before it will destroy the old ones. So at some point you can end up having more replicas at the same time working together. But that provides that the traffic will be available all the time, or recreate, which will destroy the existing replicas and spin up the new ones after that.
Question. Will this consume twice as much MuleSoft flows in the new licensing model?
That's a very good question, and I'm not sure. There was the answer from the audience here. Technically, the flow count in new MuleSoft licensing won't be counted here because the application need to be working for at least 1 hour before the flows will be counted to the licensed flows. Okay, so let's go to endpoint platform now. I will show you around. Okay. So we are here in endpoint platform. So let's first start from the runtime manager. So I will. Okay, we are in the runtime manager where we can see our. Let's first start with runtime fabric. So this is our instance that is deployed on our AKS cluster. You can see that it is running. You can see around some things here. So there is a health details. You can see that all the components are up and running. If you have the persistent gateway installed here, that will be also verified here. Because RTF is not tied to the environment per se, it's more tied to the business group. So you can create it in the runtime manager and not assign it to the environment. Then you have the option to choose which environment you want to work with your runtime fabric. So it's either this business group and its children or any other options you want to see, and also all the environments, or you can choose other options. So this is for our runtime fabric, our Flex Gateway. There's not many options to configure here because Flex Gateway is, in terms of configuration, is more configured from Helm chart or from Kubernetes itself. But we can see also Flex Gateway Meetup, which is our instance that is created on our AKS. We can see that this is connected. It's running on one replica at the moment. Despite, if you look at the Flex Gateway here, it says 7 replicas, but some of them are dead and only one is up and running. I think it will be also visible here. Yeah, so each time the pod or the deployment is restarted or I restart the cluster, new replica is spinned up and all the replicas from past 7 days are shown here. So this is our Flex Gateway and our Runtime Fabric. So Flex Gateway, in opposite to Runtime Fabric, is very tied to environment. So you need to create it per environment if you want to use it that way. And also if you want to deploy application from certain environments, you need to have a Flex Gateway created for this environment. So as I mentioned, I have deployed one application here, which is MuleSoft application. If we go into the details here, we can see that the target name is the demo RTF that I've created. Of course, you can upload the jar. This is the name of the application given. And here are options that I mentioned to you, which you can customize for your application. So you have the runtime version. You can choose, there's Java version if the runtime version supports that. So it's either 8 or 17. You can have replica count, which is horizontal scaling, and also some reserved and provisioned memory and CPU also can customize. And the deployment model, which are mentioned, so the rolling will maintain availability and will recreate the application. So now if we go to the API manager, here you can see that I have created 2 APIs. They are executing the same API definition, which are created and published on the Exchange. And if you can see at the runtime, one is of type of Flex Gateway. So this is deployed on our Flex Gateway instance. And the other is Mule runtime target, which is the auto discovery option that I also told you that with Runtime Fabric, you can also use this option. So if I go now to the Flex Gateway, I want to show you how I set up the API. So I created API that runs on Flex Gateway. And then to actually forward the traffic to the place we actually want it to, I specified the port 80 for HTTP. I created some base path which will not be forwarded to our application. And then in the upstream URLs, you defined for Kubernetes, of course, because if we want to use Kubernetes service, you are defining the service. Then after the dot, you have the namespace and the port that we defined. Of course, you can have some additional here. You can define routes and routing rules. You can route based on methods, path, host, headers. Today, of course, I have only one route, but if I add here, potentially we can even route it to google.com. Maybe we can do that at the end. But this is how you set up the API for Flex Gateway. So if you want to forward the traffic to the server underlying in the Kubernetes cluster, and this is how you can reach your MuleSoft application from within the cluster. So if you have two applications calling each other, you will using the same convention, but you don't have to include namespace if they're calling itself from the same namespace. So the question is, if the Flex Gateway is tied to the environment, can we create one Flex Gateway Can you say that again?
So in theory, okay, maybe I might be wrong here, but what I'm seeing here that you can use the dev instance of the Flex Gateway and route the traffic to UAT environment.
That's right. You can. Yes. So Flex Gateway don't care where your application is deployed because it's not seeing it as a MuleSoft application. It's seeing it as HTTP or HTTPS endpoint. So in theory, yes, you can create Flex Gateway even if in different business group, which has nothing to do with your dev environment here, as long as the endpoint is reachable from within the cluster or from wherever the Flex Gateway is deployed. So yeah, so that was about Flex Gateway API. Now maybe one more thing, just to show you that there are two different APIs and they will be executed in different way. So we have this service, and I have some policies deployed here. So one is client ID enforcement, one is message logging, and this is on Flex Gateway. And then I have the other one, which is the base endpoint, which I will be using with auto discovery in my deployed application. There's nothing specific here. It's the same way that you do that for Cloud Hub. But I just to show you that there is policy also. I added rate limiting, and that will be executed on the level of your application, not on the Flex Gateway. So I think this is pretty much it. So what I wanted to show you now is the actual way of calling our application and to do some tests. And after that, we also will be looking into the logs. As I mentioned, we defined our API that will be listening on the port 8080. We defined base path as dev, and the rest is the base path and the resource defined in my application. And we are using Flex IP that I showed you before, which is the IP of your load balancer service, external IP of your load balancer service created on Kubernetes cluster. So I will try to call the application. Fortunately, it returned 200 and some message, hello, Mules. So first of all, I will try to show you that if I put it a lot more calls, it will execute the policy of rate limiting. So it's saying that the quota has been exceeded. And this is not on the API created on Flex Gateway, but on the application itself. So are there any questions to this setup? The question is if I have two separate set of policies on Flex Gateway and on RTF application, yes. It's not how you have to do that, but this is the way I did that to show you different options, how you can apply policies both on Flex Gateway and RTF. So as I showed you just before, on Flex Gateway, I have client ID enforcement, for example, or you can have OAuth or anything that secures the traffic to your cluster, but within your cluster, you want to have different options. For example, you want to have rate limiting only on your particular application. Then you can also apply the API on the Runtime Fabric application itself with auto discovery. Any other questions? No. So I think that we are heading to the end. Last time I want to show you is where to look for the logs and what they look like and how basically to go around Kubernetes logging and where to find them. First of all, Runtime Fabric can forward logging to your endpoint monitoring, but for that, of course, you have to have Titanium subscription. I think Flex Gateway is a little bit more supporting in this case, but for Flex Gateway logging to be available within endpoint platform, you need to use logging policy. So it will only show you the logs from the logging policy, not from the Flex Gateway itself. So the logging from the APIs. But of course, you have also other options to look for your logs. In case of Azure Portal, you can utilize the tool called Live Logs, which will be streaming your logs from the container console logs. You can also use kubectl command to see the log command. And if you want to go very old school, you can even log in with bash to your application container and just basically see the logs of your container, which I will show you as well. So let's go back here. As I mentioned, maybe let's go to the application logs. So what I can show you, I've created 2 logger in my flow. Maybe I didn't mention that, but there's logger on the start and logger on the end of the Mule flow. So if we look at the live logs, it will take some time to load. You need to select the pod because the logs are forwarded from your pod. So we will be looking at the pod logs. I need to motivate it a little bit to generate something that's live streaming. And you can see that we have logs here. So we have log, it states that get meetup message flow has started and get meetup message flow has ended. And if we try to do that also from the command line, so what we have to do is to use the kubectl command. Let me expand it. So we can also see the logs from kubectl command. But first we need to get pods, and we can also do that from the command line. We can see that we have 1 pod. What we can do now is to use kubectl logs -f. That will, I think, do something similar to tail. So it will tail the file and probably also namespace. Yes, so what you can see here using kubectl log command, we are seeing the same logs as we are seeing here, hopefully. Of course, the time is a little bit different because this is the local time, this is the console time, but you can see the logs here. And as I mentioned, we can also go super old school and we can bash to the container. And you need to specify also the pod, which is this one, I think. And the namespace, of course, which is this one, I think. No, not this one. MuleSoft Meetup Dev. So we are connecting to pod. By default, it's choosing app container. Probably didn't show you that, but maybe I will show you just quickly. So for the application, we have 2 containers, which is app and endpoint monitoring. The app is our main one, and the endpoint monitoring is our sidecar, which forwards some metrics. And if you use log forwarding, it will forward also logs to your endpoint platform. Now we are logged into the container bash, basically, so we can look around what is there. We can see that we can look at some logs here as well. So if we go to logs, these are some files that are storing our logs. So mule-0 is our application logs. So let's think what we can do. Maybe this. New. And we are seeing the same logs that we were seeing for the console logs. So these logs are forwarded by pod to console to Kubernetes collects them, and they are available via this kubectl logs command, but you can also see them here. And if you have Titanium subscription, you can also see them in your endpoint monitoring. I think that we are pretty much done with everything I wanted to show you. So the question is if you want to see anything like, I don't know, scaling the application, or there's one thing I left at the very end and I didn't do that before, and we can upgrade RTF together if you want. So if we go to Runtime Fabrics, maybe before I will do that, because I don't know what are the consequences. If you want to see anything else, this is the good moment. And that I can try to upgrade the RTF from any point platform. Okay. So there is a question. Any thoughts on when you would recommend to decouple the gateway functionality from the Mule runtime into Flex Gateway? There are pros and cons, I guess. Would you consider Flex Gateway to implement a centralized API gateways cluster for enterprise with mixed topology and application landscape? If yes, would you still put them as ingress in Kubernetes cluster? That very much depends on your needs, basically, because API Flex Gateway can secure not only MuleSoft applications. So it doesn't have to be deployed as an ingress controller on your Kubernetes cluster if you want to use that as a single entry point for other your APIs. So for example, you want to have sort of service bus, you can use Flex Gateway as a single point when you will route your traffic, and it can call APIs exposed anywhere from within your network. It can forward traffic to your ingress controller that it won't be Flex Gateway, for example. It will be either Istio or Nginx or any other option. If I recommend to decouple the gateway functionality from the Mule runtime into Flex Gateway, again, it depends, because your Flex Gateway APIs, in terms of policies, for example, or in terms of security, can have different needs than your runtime fabric. So for example, on RTF, you want to have client ID enforcement because you can easily connect one application to another in Runtime Fabric. But if you want to call your Runtime Fabric application from outside of the network or from any other application, you can apply some additional policies here or any other, I don't know, token validation or MTLS or whatever you want on the Flex Gateway level instead of executing everything on Runtime Fabric, because you don't need that level of security, for example. So that's one use case, but frankly, there are some use cases I mentioned about about Flex Gateway. Maybe I will circle back to that one quickly. I think it's this one. So you can see, you will be able to see here for MuleSoft offers as use cases for Flex Gateway, because it might not be that very popular. So I will show you one option that it's similar to what I try to achieve here, which is this one. So you have Flex Gateway protecting your application or your services deployed on the Kubernetes cluster. Of course, it's in VPC and it's protected. I didn't implement all that stuff because it's difficult. But in your real scenario, you will have it behind, I don't know, firewall, whatever. So you can use that as an ingress controller, but as an ingress gateway, basically, but not necessarily. If you have other use cases and you want to expose other APIs, even publicly, whatever, you can check those use cases here, what MuleSoft is offering as a use case for the Flex Gateway. So I would treat them as two separate products for two separate needs. So yeah, I would decouple them in some cases. I think that's all for the questions from online guests. Is there anything else from the team in person?
I'm wondering if we still have time. You mentioned scaling possibilities.
Yes, sure. We can try to do that. So the question was about scaling capabilities. I won't be able to show you the scaling capabilities of Flex Gateway because that's on the level of deployment, Kubernetes deployment options. So I would need either modify the Gantt chart or try to play around with the deployment, but we can look into the application scaling. So as I mentioned, we have as usually with MuleSoft, so we have vertical scaling and horizontal scaling. So we can either increase the number of pods that will be spinned up or replicas if you wish. So that will scale horizontally, but we can also add some more shared resources. So it is CPU and memory. We can try to increase that. Honestly, I'm not sure how much of the resources I have on my cluster, so I can try to increase something and hope that it will not break. But also I can increase the number of replicas, and I will show you what happens, basically. So we can scale it from the runtime fabric. It will apply the configuration, so it will create new replicas to match the need or to match the deployment. You can monitor the status here. So we have one replica that is in desired state and the other one that is initializing. And when all be good, we will be able to see that the configuration is applied and all the desired number of replicas are there. It will take some time, but maybe we can see some movement also here. So if we go to our workload, we should see, we have 2 pods. So we scale our MuleSoft application into 2 replicas. So it creates new pod with the same configuration. We have 2 of them right now. They're running, both up and running here. So hopefully, yes, here we also have desired configuration applied. We have 2 out of 2 replicas started. So this is one way of the scaling. I can try to increase memory if you wish, but I don't know what would happen.
Very brave.
Very brave.
Gigabytes.
Yes, but I will be destroying all this installation after this meetup, so we can do whatever you want right now. So it is updating again because we changed the underlying configuration of the replica. So we will be creating 2 new replicas. It will also take some time. We can see that this is our previous last successful deployment. And now we have new configuration and it's trying to spin up. Failed to connect. It's not a good sign, but let's see what happens. The negative, maybe we will be able to create negative scenario here. No, unfortunately not successful.
Unfortunately, it worked.
Unfortunately, it worked as expected. Previously, we have some pods. I think if we refresh them, we will have different pods with different IDs, or I guess. So this is the way to scale MuleSoft application. RTF as an agent and all the components of RTF are not scaled. They are running, I think, on only 1 node, but they are not necessary for the application to be fully functional and working. So it also knows its deployment configuration. So if something happens to the node when the RTF is running, it will spin up on different node, basically trying to recreate the namespace and everything. Not the namespace per se, but the services. Any other questions? So the question is about licensing again. I don't feel very comfortable with the licensing, but I would assume that if you scale, you will utilize number of flows the same way that if you scale the workers or the containers in Cloud Hub. So if you have twice the size or two replicas, you will utilize. Okay. So I think that we don't have any more questions. Nothing from the audience online, nothing from our audience here. So we will move on with our presentation as usual. Maybe one last thing, I have added some kubectl, commands here at the end, but this is all we already covered, so nothing new, just to wrap it up. We also covered questions. And I think that's all from today's session. I will hand over to our second presenter to continue.
Okay, I understand the questions are done. So we can move to the next slide. And okay, we've got some issues, but fortunately we will manage to make it working. The next time will be better for sure. Keep coming. And I would like to thank the people that joined us online as well. Of course, thank you very much.